Welcome back to The Explainer. I am so thrilled to have you with us today because we are looking at a truly fascinating piece of historical and religious rhetoric. Today, we're going to systematically break down a speech delivered on March 20th, 1983 by Reverend Sun Myung, the founder of the Unification Church. The speech itself is called Victor Throughout Three Ages, and let me tell you, it is an incredibly dense, highly structured text. It offers this really fascinating look into how an entire theological worldview is constructed from the ground up. So today, we're going to explore the internal logic of this speech together, looking directly at the concepts Moon presented to his followers. Okay, let's dive right into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First up, the universal number 3. Second, unificationism and the world. Third, the role of true parents. And finally, the call to action.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the universal number 3 of foundational logic.
Now, what's absolutely crucial to understand about this 1983 speech is that it attempts to ground its theology in mathematical and natural logic. To really get this, we have to look at the divine principle. This is the core foundational teaching of the Unification Church. According to the text, the divine principle asserts that everything in nature and history goes through very specific, predictable stages of growth. Moon points out that the number 3 is actually a fundamental building block of reality. He notes things like how nature has the mineral, plant, and animal worlds. Even our arms and fingers have 3 sections. And society, he argues, has lower, middle, and upper levels. He essentially uses all of this as proof of a universal law. So, building on this rule of 3, the speech claims that literally all of creation has to go through 3 absolute stages of growth. First, you have formation. Second is growth. And the final stage is completion. And these aren't just abstract ideas. In this theology, they are strict laws governing how life itself develops. It's super fascinating to see how he takes this biological and mathematical rule and just maps it directly onto human history. He argues that God's providential work is also bound by these exact same 3 stages. So the Old Testament era represents the formation stage, the New Testament era is the growth stage, and finally, the present day, which he calls the completed Testament era, is the ultimate time of completion. To further prove this point, Moon compares Eastern and Western ways of thinking. He characterizes the Oriental mindset as reserved, avoiding extremes, and observing from the inside out. In contrast, he describes the Western mindset as openly declaring thoughts and observing from the outside in. Now, he isn't saying one is better than the other. Rather, he's arguing that true harmony requires a central third point to balance these 2 opposing extremes. Without that third point, there's just division. Moving right along to Section 2, Unificationism and the World, focusing on Cold War geopolitics. So here, Moon dramatically shifts this rule of 3 right onto the global stage of 1983, which, remember, is right in the middle of the Cold War. He breaks down the major global movements of the time into 3 categories. On the right, you have the free world, driven by humanistic idealism, which Moon heavily critiques for moral decline and corruption. On the left, you've got the communist world, driven by materialistic idealism, which he denounces for using fear, force, and essentially ruling at gunpoint. Neither of these, he argues, can save the world. Instead, they have to be synthesized by a center world, driven by God-centered unificationism. To really explain this, he uses a super vivid visual metaphor. He asks the audience to imagine the communist world and the democratic world as 2 separate pyramids. The unification world doesn't just build a third pyramid next to them, it actually uses those 2 failing pyramids as a foundation to build one huge, overarching pyramid. But he stresses a huge caveat. The central point of this new pyramid must be absolutely perfectly vertical. If it leans even slightly to the left or the right, it becomes unfair and the whole thing collapses. Let's move to Section 3, the role of true parents, the central figure. Okay, so we've gone from the mechanics of the universe to global politics, and now we zoom into the absolute center of it all, the messianic figurehead. This is where the theology introduces the concept of true parents. According to the speech, fallen humanity requires a completely new unfallen lineage because the world has been governed by Satan. The true parents are positioned as the starting point of true love in history. By uniting with them, followers can cleanse themselves of satanic conditions and essentially digest the evils of the world. The speech outlines very strict spiritual and gender roles within this framework too. Reverend Moon, as true father, represents the vertical line, meaning absolute, unbending alignment with God. His wife, as true mother, represents the horizontal line, earthly harmony and family tradition. Imagine being a listener in that audience. Moon argues that for you to find fulfillment and true love, you can't simply connect with others. You must first cross through this exact center intersection represented by the true parents.
And this brings us to a really surprising twist, the ultimate audacious goal of this entire theology. It's not actually just about humans finding salvation. Moon states his cosmic purpose is to actually liberate God. Seriously, he claims that God has been watching the world suffer under Satan, unable to intervene. By bringing humanity into one united center, Moon is pledging to save God from his own historical sorrow.
Which leads us to our final part, Section 4, the call to action and its urgent demands.
You see, this massive theology was actually a setup for some incredibly intense, urgent demands placed on listeners in the spring of 1983. Moon highlights this extreme urgency using a historical timeline. He frames the 40 years since the end of World War II in 1945 as a wilderness period, much like the Israelites wandering in the desert. He then declares 1983 as the start of the final 3 years of this test. If the members succeed by 1985, they will end that 40-year period and enter a global Canaan. Essentially, they're on the clock. To achieve this, he gives them highly specific numerical goals. The first is 360. This is the exact number of homes each member must claim in their home church mission. By taking responsibility for 360 homes, Moon tells his followers they are creating a microscopic version of the universe, laying a literal, physical foundation for God's electricity to flow right into the world.
But it gets even more intense. The second numerical goal is 40. Moon instructs his followers that they must secure 40 spiritual children, which means new converts, within these final 3 years. He demands an incredible sacrifice of time and energy to meet this quota, telling them to bypass normal life, family concerns, and personal desires to achieve this specific number. And to motivate them, he uses striking, highly provocative language. He tells them, and I quote, "As a heavenly bullet, you must be so fast and so strong that you penetrate the barriers of the nation, the world, the spirit world, and then thrust yourself forward into the heart of God." He's demanding that they become a sharp, unstoppable force, a needle point of super strong steel that absolutely cannot be deflected by society's objections. Wow, right? So that brings us to the end of our breakdown. When we look at this 1983 speech, we see a fascinating synthesis. We see the deepest anxieties of the Cold War being wrapped in a complex mathematical and historical theology, and then that structure is used to demand absolute, unquestioning devotion. It leaves us with a truly provocative question. How does a religious movement use the global tensions of its era to shape the daily physical actions of its followers? It's a profound look into the architecture of ideology. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this text today, and I really hope this explainer left you with plenty to think about.